Welcome back to our course on Calculus RS integration. In this lecture, we are going to see the fundamental theorem of calculus. The fundamental theorem of calculus is split into two things, and the first theorem let us see now. So this states we are given a function which is Riemann integrable on the interval AB for some x between a and b. We put big F of x to be the integral a to x f of t dt. Okay, this is what we write it. Okay, this is how we define big F of x. Then if we define in this fashion, then we'll have to prove this function is continuous on the interval AB. Furthermore, if your function f is continuous at a point x0 in AB, then your function big F is differentiable at x0, and also the derivative evaluated at the point x0 is going to be simply the function f evaluated at the point x0. Let us get into the proof of this theorem, and here it is given that f is Riemann integrable on AB, therefore it has to be a bounded one. This very well tells you that f is bounded on the interval AB. Therefore, hence there exists some real number m which is a positive quantity such that absolute of f of x small than or equals m for, okay, here we are using the notation x, so let me denote it as t for a less than or equals t less than or equals p. Even if you use x here, it is of no bother. Okay, now for every epsilon positive, we'll have to find out some delta positive such that delta condition implies the epsilon condition. That is what the definition of continuity says. Okay, for every epsilon, choose delta to be epsilon upon m. Since epsilon is positive, clearly your delta is also positive, right? Now assume for any x and y in the interval AB, absolute of y minus x is less than delta. This is our assumption. So with this assumption, we'll have to claim absolute of f of y minus f of x is less than epsilon. This is what we'll have to prove. Okay, now we are taking arbitrary 2 points from this interval a and b. So this leads to three cases. Case 1 is when x and y are same. If x and y are same, this clearly tells us that f of x equals f of y. Therefore f of y minus f of x is 0. Therefore absolute of f of y minus f of y minus f of x is 0, which is smaller than epsilon. This case leads to the requirement. Now let us get into the next case. So case 2 is when a may be equal to x or smaller than x and x is smaller than y, and we have this one. Okay, now let us consider absolute of f of y minus f of x. What is f of x? It is integral a to x. So this is integral a to y f of t dt, and this is integral a to x f of t dt under absolute sign. So this is what we have. If you look at here, first comes x and then comes y. Therefore, this integral may be split as integral a to x f of t dt plus integral x to y f of t dt minus integral a to x f of t dt. These two terms gets cancelled and we are left with what? Integral x to y f of t dt. And using the property that absolute of integral a to b f d alpha is smaller than or equals integral a to b absolute of f d alpha. So using this property, we may write absolute of f of y minus f of x. This quantity is smaller than or equals integral x to y absolute of f of t dt. So this is nothing but integral x to y. This is smaller than or equals m, since supremum of absolute of t is m. So this is integral x to y m dt. Since m is a constant, we may take it outside. This is integral x to y dt, right? So this is absolute of f of y minus f of x is smaller than or equals m multiplied with y minus x. Since y is bigger than x, this may also be written as m times of absolute of y minus x, and by our assumption absolute of y minus x is what? Less than delta. So this is less than m times of delta, and delta is what? Epsilon upon m. So this is m epsilon upon m, which is epsilon. Therefore, your absolute of f of y minus f of x is smaller than epsilon. We have proved the requirement for the second case as well. Now we will see what is happening with the third case. The third case is a smaller than or equals y smaller than x smaller than or equals b, that is y bigger than x. In this case also, let us consider absolute of f of y minus f of x. So this is what? Integral a to y f of t dt minus integral a to x f of t dt, right? So here this may be written in a way that, how shall we write? So this is first comes y. Here a to x means this can be split into a to y and y to x. So this is integral a to y f of t dt minus integral a to y f of t dt, and then minus integral y to x f of t dt. So these two terms gets cancelled, and here we are left with minus integral y to x f of t dt. So this may be written as integral x to y f of t dt, right? Just by taking this minus inside, this limits gets interchanged, and again using the same arguments, this is integral x to y absolute of f of t dt, which is smaller than or equals integral x to y m dt. Since m is a constant, we take it outside, and when we do this integration, this is going to be simply y minus x, and of course this is smaller than or equals m times of absolute of y minus x. Okay, this is what we are going to have. This may be negative quantity, but this is smaller than or equals this quantity, right? Or if you don't want to get a negative quantity here, what you can do is that here itself, instead of inverting these things, you just apply absolute value to this minus, so that you can have this as y to x itself, and hence you will have y to x here and y to x here, and you will have x minus y. So this may be written as absolute of x minus y, and using the symmetry you can write this to be m times of absolute of x minus y. So finally what you have is absolute of f of y minus f of x is smaller than or equals m times of absolute of y minus x, and again using the condition, this is m times of delta, that is m multiplied with epsilon upon delta, epsilon upon m, which leads to epsilon. So finally what we have is absolute of f of y minus f of x is less than epsilon whenever absolute of y minus x less than delta. This proves f is continuous, okay, continuous at all the points of a comma b. So it is continuous on the closed interval a comma b. This is what we have proved. Now in particular, let us take f is continuous at some point x naught in the interval a comma b. Okay, now we will have to prove what? F is differentiable at this point. In order to prove this, let us make use of the continuity, and that gives you, for every epsilon positive there exists a delta positive, such that absolute of f of x minus f of x naught less than epsilon whenever absolute of x minus x naught less than delta, and this is for the points in AB. Okay, now here we'll have to claim f is differentiable at the point x naught, and f prime of x naught is simply small f of x naught. Consider f of t minus f of x naught upon t minus x naught minus f of x naught. This is equivalent form of the definition of differentiability, right? So in it, generally what do we have? We have, okay, let me write that in another color. Generally what we have is limit t approaches x, f of t minus f of x upon t minus x is f prime at x. So if you take it this side and write this way, t minus x minus f prime of x, if you take this absolute value, this has to be some negligible quantity. Okay, this is exactly the thing that we have considered. If we prove this is smaller than epsilon, we are done. Okay, for which what we are going to do now is that we write this as 1 upon t minus x naught. What is f of t? It is integral a to t f of t dt minus integral a to x naught f of t dt. Okay, minus f prime of, I think it is f of x naught. I am going right. So this is what. Okay, and now what I am doing is that 1 upon t minus x naught multiplied with integral a to t. This a to t, what I am doing is that I am splitting this as a to x naught f of t dt plus x naught to t f of t dt minus a to x naught f of t dt, and I just multiplied this too. So f of x naught multiplied with t minus x naught. So this is how I write things out. So here you may see that these and these gets cancelled, and you may ask me why I have split a to t as a to x naught and x naught to t. Why can't it happen in the other way? Even in the other way also it is possible. Like here I am just talking in the right sense. If you want to talk it in the left sense, that is also possible. Fine. So let me proceed with the right sense itself. And this is 1 upon t minus x naught, and this is x naught to t f of t dt. Here I have f of x naught outside, right? So this may be written as simply integral dt x naught to t. I may put it this way. And this f of x naught is independent of t, hence I write this as 1 upon t minus x naught multiplied with integral x naught to t f of t dt minus integral x naught to t f of x naught dt. Okay, so we have come till this, and what are we here? Integral limits are common. Variable of integration is also common. Hence, these two integrals can be made to a single integral, and that is 1 upon t minus x naught multiplied with integral x naught to t f of t minus f of x naught dt. Fine. So if you make the things in a precise way, this is smaller. Okay, when you take this absolute sign inside, what are you going to get? You would get 1 upon absolute of t minus x naught and integral x naught to t f of t minus f of x naught multiplied with this dt. Now, using the properties of integration, this is integral x naught to t absolute of f of t minus f of x naught dt, right? This quantity is less than epsilon, that is what we have written. So this quantity is epsilon by the base assumption that we made in the statement of the theorem. Okay, so right here, this is 1 upon t minus x naught, and this is going to be what? Integral absolute of t minus x naught to t epsilon dt. Epsilon is a constant, hence we take it outside. Epsilon upon absolute of t minus x naught, and here what are we going to have? T minus x naught. Since I told you people that I am talking in the right sense, t minus x naught and the absolute of t minus x naught are same, so this may be written in this way as well. Actually what I get is that t minus x naught only. So this may be written as absolute of t minus x naught upon absolute of t minus x naught multiplied with epsilon. These two things gets cancelled, and finally what we have is absolute of f of t minus f of x naught upon t minus x naught minus f of x naught is less than epsilon. Hence f prime evaluated at x naught is f of x naught, and this completes the proof. Here we have just proved the first part of the fundamental theorem of calculus, right? Now let us see the interesting thing. we have been using this from our school days itself, and mostly this is what we have studied as fundamental theorem of calculus. But if you get into the literature of analysis, clearly the theorem that we have seen just now is called as fundamental theorem of calculus part 1, and this is the fundamental theorem of calculus part 2. This tells you that if your f is Riemann integrable on the interval a b, and if there is a differentiable function big F on the same interval a b such that the derivative of big F is small f, then this integral a to b f dx may be written as f of b minus f of a. That is the function big F evaluated at b minus the function evaluated at the point a. Let us get into the proof of this theorem. This given f is Riemann integrable, okay, by the equivalent conditions, we can find a partition P on the interval AB such that absolute of summation I runs from 1 to n f of ti delta xi minus integral a to b f of x dx is smaller than epsilon, and we mark this as equation. This is just from the definition, equivalent conditions of the integrability. We have seen these things for RS integrability. Again and again I am telling you people that whatever things hold for RS integrability will hold for Riemann integrability, whereas the converse need not be true. If you see the theorem that we have seen just now, and the theorem that we are going to see, and the theorem that we have seen in the previous lectures are applicable only to Riemann integration, not for Riemann-Stieltjes integration, right? Okay, from the given thing, it is also given that big F is a differentiable function. Differentiable function on the interval AB. Now, by mean value theorem, mean value theorem is applied to subintervals. F of xi minus f of xi minus 1 is f prime evaluated at some point ti multiplied with xi minus xi minus 1. So this is what? Delta fi this is delta fi, and this is f prime evaluated at ti, and this is delta xi. Okay, this may be written as delta fi or simply f of xi. Fine. Whenever this inequality holds, we can add all such things. The summation runs from 1 to n. Summation I runs from 1 to n f prime of ti and delta xi. From the given condition, what we can do is that this quantity is going to be what? F of x1 minus f of x0 plus f of x2 minus f of x1, and this goes this way till f of xn minus f of xn minus 1 in the right hand side, in the left hand side. Whereas in the right hand side, your f prime is given to be the function f itself. So this is summation I runs from 1 to n f of ti delta xi. Okay, and this becomes what? This is simply f of xn minus f of x0 is going to be summation I runs from 1 to n f of ti multiplied with delta xi. Okay, we mark this as equation 2. Substitute 2 into the equation 1 and hence you are going to have f of xn minus f of x naught minus integral a to b f of x dx is smaller than epsilon. And this is what is your xn? This is b and x naught is a. This is integral a to b f of x dx, which is smaller than epsilon. Since epsilon is arbitrary quantity, what we get is integral a to b f of x dx. Actually what we get is f of b minus f of a minus integral a to b f of x dx is 0. This very well tells us that integral a to b f of x dx is f of b minus f of a, and this completes the proof. Thank you.